Hey everybody, it's Tiffany from Quilter's Workshop, and if you haven't caught my last few videos, I've mentioned a couple of times that the videos that I've been posting so far in 2021 have been a little bit of playing catch up on videos that I started to film throughout the summer and the fall of 2020, just leading up to Christmas there. So today's video is going to be a discussion and a tutorial on a maple leaf quilt block. So obviously it's not like a revolutionary pattern. It's not something that is brand new or anything like that. I basically had a customer who wanted to custom order a queen size quilt in the fall, and she sent me a picture of a maple leaf quilt that she saw, and it was a little bit vintage looking, I would say. So I think the photo was quite old. I'm not exactly sure where she saw it from, but she sent it to me and basically said that was what she had in mind. Can you recreate it? So I just thought that I would share that with you. So obviously I completed the quilt many months ago and it's gone, and I don't have it anymore because it's at my customer's house. And so I did film thorough instructions on how to actually make the block. So the thing with my videos, and I've said a few times, is that they are first and foremost video diaries for myself, so I can go back and check what size did I cut this if I ever wanted to replicate something that I made in the past. And they're also meant to be used as some inspiration or a starting point. So if you are brand new to quilting, I do not exactly go over how to make a half square triangle, which is something that you need to know how to do to make the maple leaf quilt block. So if you have some quilting experience under your belt, you'll be able to watch my instructions, no problem. I give you the cutting instructions for how to actually make the block. So once you've made the block, there's endless possibilities of what you can do with it in terms of the quilt size. You can make a table runner, a wall hanging, a quilt for a bed. I made a queen size quilt, so I do go over 3 different options for the layout. So a lot of different quilt blocks, whether they're log cabins or the maple leaf block that I'm showing in this video, you can assemble them in so many different ways, which is one of the reasons that I of course love quilting, because it has so many creative opportunities to change a quilt even if you're making the same block as somebody else. So it's awesome. So I do show you 3 different ways to put it together with or without sashing. Now the amount of blocks that you need and whether or not you put sashing, and if you do, how big you cut it, and the borders are not discussed in this video because it's completely irrelevant. It's up to you. So depending on the size that you need, I show you how to make a 12-inch block. So if you're trying to get to a king size or a crib size or a wall hanging, you need to just kind of work backwards in terms of, if my block is 12 inches and I want my quilt to be 60 inches across, you kind of work backwards from there. So a lot of quilts in the more modern styles, sashing isn't really a thing anymore, and borders aren't really a thing anymore. I am more of a traditional quilter, so I do really like the look of the sashing, and I like putting borders, usually an inner border and an outer border. So for reference, if you want to really know what I did, because I don't explain it after showing the layout options, I cut my sashing about 2 inches. I did use cornerstones, so I'll show the final picture of my quilt so you can see exactly what it looks like with the sashing and the borders. My inner border, I believe I cut around 2 or 3 inches, and then the outer border was about 5, I believe. But again, not crucial information, because it can be whatever you want. If you want your quilt to hang lower, if you have a really high box spring, or if you don't, like if you don't have a box spring, or if you don't have a very high bed frame, you might want your quilt to be a lot smaller, even if it's still a queen size. So that's sort of the beauty of making your own quilt, because you can make it exactly the size that you need. And then the only other details that I wanted to just quickly add in is that I did get it machine quilted professionally by a long arm quilter, and then I hand bound it myself. And of course, you don't have to hand bind it. You can do your binding however you would like on the machine, whatever works best for you. So If you have any comments, you can leave them down below, and my social media links are always listed in the description bar as well. I post to my Instagram account the most often, but I also have a Facebook page where I share pretty much the same information over there. And yeah, so if this helped even just one person, that will just make my day. And if you have any questions, you can send me an email at quilters.workshop@gmail.com. And if you do make something following this video, I would love if you sent me a picture of it, because that would also make my day. So thank you so much for taking the time to watch today's video, and I hope you have a great day. Hey everybody, so today we're going to be doing a quilt tutorial on how to make maple leaf quilt blocks. So these are pretty versatile because you can use them to make table runners, wall hangings. Right now I'm working on a queen size quilt of all just the same blocks. So this is a custom order, so all of the colors and the pattern was chosen by my customer. So I already have most of them done, really. I just kind of decided that it would be a fun little tutorial to put up in case it's useful for anybody. And of course, you can also put it together any way that you would like. So we'll get into more about that later. But for now, we're just going to go over making the block. So the block itself is actually meant to just be like this. So my finished block size are 12.5, so that when they are joined together they will be 12 by 12s. If you're new to quilting, 12-inch blocks are very standard, so especially if you're making a queen or a king size quilt. But if you were making something smaller, maybe you were making this miniature or something, you could just adjust the sizes. So this pattern obviously isn't something that I came up with. My customer, like I was saying, sent me a picture of what she wanted, and I've done many maple leaf things before. I've used this block in other quilts. I've made a Canada Day themed table runner before using these blocks, all that kind of thing. And I've been sewing for 20 years, so I can just look at something and know how to do it and what size I need to cut it. So obviously, because there are three 3 blocks by 3 blocks that make up this one, and I need it to be 12.5. That means that my individual squares here need to be 4 inches, right? 4, 8, 12. So the solid ones are cut 4.5 by 4.5 square because we're using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And then the half square triangles, so these little units right here, these are cut 4 7/8 and then cut on a diagonal. So that's the way I've done it here. You can use other techniques to do a half square triangle, but that's just what I went for in this situation. So for one block, you will need one background square. So I've done lights and darks. So all of my squares have the same beige as the background, and I'm using blue, red, like red and burgundy, and then also like goldy brown. So I have 3 types of colors in my color palette, but of each color there's several different prints. So as you can see here, of the blue ones, there are slightly different, like these 2 are different fabrics, that's a different fabric, and there's a darker one in here somewhere. So you can really do whatever you'd like, but I've mixed it up a little bit just so that it's not too repetitive. So for just one square, you'll need one background or one light fabric. That's 4.5 by 4.5, and then you need 3 squares that are 4 7/8. So this is 1 square, this is 2 squares, this is 3 squares. And then for the leaf print, or the dark option, is 3 squares that are 4.5, and then you need 2 squares that are 4 7/8. So 1, 2, and then the stem is 7 inches long and 1 1/4 inches wide. So I'll show you what it looks like when the pieces are not sewn together. So for this one, sorry, there's some threads on it. We have 3 squares that are 4.5. That's going to be there. This is my stem. My stem is 7 inches long and 1 1/4 inches wide. That will go there. And then these, just so that you understand and get a visual, For the colored option, you need 2 squares that are 4 7/8. So when I was cutting my fabric, this is a square that's 4 7/8 inches square, and then you just lay your ruler on and you cut on a diagonal so that you get 2 triangles. And so then these are all going to be here. There, and one more. Okay, so that is everything that you need for one square of a dark or a printed fabric. Now the stems, I have a bunch of them here that are almost done. They just need to be trimmed. So what ends up happening, here's a different one here, is you're going to find the center of your stem. So here's my stem. You can fold it in half. What I ended up doing was I just ironed them so that I would have a crease, but you can finger press it or you can put a pin in the middle, but you'll need to find the center of all your stems right there. And then the triangles, I don't have any left over right now because, like I was saying, I'm very, very close to being done all of the blocks, so I don't have any loose triangles. But what you'll do is with those same triangles, the 4 7/8 cut on a diagonal, you'll need top and bottom. You'll find the center of the triangle this direction, and you'll pin it on, and then open it up, iron it, and then find the center of this one and just join it on. And when you do that, and then iron it again, of course, it'll look like this. I always press my seams to the darkest side, so that's why they're both into the middle like that. So once you put on those triangles onto your 7-inch stem, you'll notice that you'll have a little bit of excess all the way around, and that is what you want, because then you can trim it down. This one is already trimmed, so I'll just show you. So you're able to trim it down so that you can get the right angles here, because if you cut it a little bit too small, the shape of where your stem meets your leaf right in here could be a little wonky. So you don't want one side of your half square triangle to be more uneven than the other. So you want the stem to look like it is centered in your leaf and that it's not like shifted. If there's a little bit more beige on one side, you don't want the stem to start here and the stem to kind of be up too high, if that makes sense. So definitely keep this at 7 inches long. It's okay if you know, you're using up scraps and maybe it's only like 6 3/4 or something. That's okay, but keep it 7 inches, like the best that you can. And then basically the assembly of the block is very easy. The stem is probably the most confusing if you're new to quilting. So what you can do, if you're using all the same colors or if you're doing really scrappy leaves out of just leftover fabrics, and as long as you're doing darks and lights, you can sit at your sewing machine with all of just the triangles and don't worry about this part yet, and just sit there with all of your triangles and just sew one from a dark pile and have a pile of your lights or your backgrounds and just pair them together and just join them in a big chain. So then once those are all pressed and ironed, they will be full squares here, and then you can join your block in the rows that they're meant to be. So what you'll do is you'll grab your background square and 2 of your completed triangle sets, make this row, and then you'll make the second row, and then the third row you'll grab your now completed stem that's nice and trimmed, and you'll add that in. And just make sure that when you're trimming it, it's accurate, so that when you're putting it up against a plain square that's 4.5 inches, it's exactly the right size. So these pieces are all actually extra because I cut one too many red squares, so that's why I had these to show you for the sample but I mentioned that I didn't have any more of my beige because it's all used up because I cut the right amount of beige. So this block, where I'm at right now is I'm finishing up the red. So I have all the blues finished, all the browns finished, and I have 8 more reds to finish. And all that I had needed to do was the stems. And the stems are done. I just need to trim those ones, and then I have everything else for all of the blocks ready, so I can basically just, once I have the stem trimmed, I can just add it into my pile for each block that I'm working with. So as you can see, I had assembled as much as I could without the stems. I find it easier to just go ahead and make all the stems at once, just like I was saying about these half square triangles. So here you can see that I made this row, and then I made this row, and I joined them together. So I'll flip it over so you can see all my seams. It's really important to iron as you go. Make sure your seams are going opposite directions. Make sure it's nice and neat. That's really important. And then my last row here, what I'll do is put this right sides together. I'll pin that there, stitch it down, and then once I've sewn it, I'll iron it. So I'll iron this seam, and this seam needs to be ironed as well. And then it's just a matter of putting this last row on this block, and it will be the exact same as how we joined those two. So really quick little explanation on the block. If you're familiar with quilting, this will be very simple for you. And if you're not, this is a really easy quilt block that, like I said, could be used for many different things, just the block itself or the quilt. So once I have all of my blocks done and I go on to the assembly, I'll share that part with you as well, just so you know what I ended up doing for the sashing, because my customer wants it to have the sashing between the blocks. But once I'm done all the blocks, I'll show a few different options for layouts and different ways that you can put it together. Okay, so I finished up all of the blocks, and as I was mentioning earlier, there are a few different ways that you can put this together, actually more than a few, but try not to be like overwhelming. So one of the ways that I have this laid out right now, and I don't have all of them up here because of course once you lose the seam allowances and things like that, I basically don't have a big enough surface area to lay out all 42 of the blocks. But anyway, one of the ways that you can do it is to put them in groups of 4. So this method I would suggest doing without sashing. So you could join 4 of your squares together to create a larger block, and then as you can see right now there's 3 sets of 4 across, so you could kind of work them into bigger squares and then build your quilt together in rows from there. Second option, once you put the 4 squares together and create those larger blocks, you can still add the sashing, but I would do it around the larger block instead of in between these individual blocks. So for those of you who don't know, sashing is basically grid lines essentially that separate your blocks. It's a more traditional style. A lot of modern quilts don't do sashing anymore, but I still prefer that look because I'm a more traditional style myself. So you could do about 2-inch strips around each of these big blocks to separate them so that each one you can sort of see it more as a focal point. You can also just put all of the larger squares together exactly how they are with no sashing in between. That works as well. Second option, so the center would stay the same. So the center of our quilt is right here with these 4, right? Now, when my customer sent me the picture of the quilt that she saw that made her decide on this design, the way that it was starting in the middle, the quilt was almost divided into quadrants, and that was the direction of the blocks. So basically, if this was the middle of our quilt, this section starting from this block and working downwards, all of these blocks would be going this direction. So I'll just flip them quickly to show you, so that all of these leaves would be falling down and to the left essentially. So see how these ones are coming down this way, and then what would happen is all of the ones in this quadrant would be flipped and going up this way. This quadrant would be going up and to the left, and then this quadrant would be going down and to the left. So it would sort of look like a bit of a starburst. So the center is like that, and they all go in their appropriate directions from the center. So that method, you could leave them without sashing, but because they are all sort of essentially on their own, it would be each individual block. We're not joining them the same as how we would be doing these larger sets of 4. I think it would be a little bit busy, especially because we have a lot of different colors going on. So I would recommend, if it was for me and I was going for that more quadrant based design, I'll put a picture of it here so you can see the whole thing flipped, because I've just flipped it several times and forgot that I'm also filming a video. So I took pictures to send to my customer so she can help decide on the layout, and I don't want to have to keep flipping it. It takes a while. So anyway, from there, I would put the sashing in between if you were going to be dividing it up into quadrants and making each block be its own. The sashing would really help break up the busyness, especially if you pick a more subtle fabric to be the sashing as well. And then, of course, the third option that I see, at least, is to have all of them be the same direction. So, for example, if you want them to all be coming in this general direction, then I would put the whole quilt so that all of the leaves, I'll just switch a couple so you can kind of see a small portion of it at least, but I'll also put the picture of what it would be like. So if it was me, and if this was the method that I decided, I would put them all to go the same direction. So see how my stems are all coming down this way. So I would do the whole quilt so the leaves are all coming on one angle, whether that's, you could flip them so the stems are on the left hand side and you could have them all as if they're blowing this way across. But if you were going to have them all coming down into the right with the stems pointing that way, you could sew them all right up against each other. If you really wanted, that would be busy as well, but everyone's taste is different. So if you were going to do them all facing one direction, you could also still do the sashing. So I think to sort of plan ahead based on the size that you're going for. So this is going to be a queen size, but if you were trying to make it smaller or bigger, I would definitely plan out whether or not you were intending on having the sashing first so that you could decide on what size of blocks you're going to have, so that you also know how big you're cutting your sashing so that your whole quilt is your desired size.